Good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. If you could please kindly take your seats so we can begin. We are going to all right, good afternoon and welcome back. I trust lunch was good. To begin with, I would like to kindly ask those of you sitting in the peripheries to try and come a little closer because we have plenty of space up in the front and we would look great a little more together than this. So if you're sitting way in the back, please join us here up in the tables. The tables are free. Please join us closer to the podium. So we look better together. If you are sitting way in the back, kindly please come closer and sit in the tables here. So yes, please come closer. We have all these tables free. You could sit anywhere you want. Yes, else please come here. So please come forward and let's look better together instead of sitting pretty much apart. So we have a slight change in the panel. Panel 1 and panel 2 are going to be switched. We're going to start with panel 2 now, which His Excellency Dr. Ethiopian, State Minister of Finance, is going to chair. But before that, we have a video, the second video documentary for you to view before we go into the session. Hold on. Okay, so in the interest of time, one more change again. In the interest of time, we're going to jump on the video and go straight to the panel discussion because we have panelists who have to run to other engagements as well. We want to catch them before they leave. So if my organizing team, you could help me with the names of the panelists on their screens by the chairs so they can assume their seats. This session, discussion session, is going to be on opportunities for private sector engagement in the Ethiopian transport sector, which is going to have 3 panelists. That is Mr. Omar Kahan, Director of International Offices, Dubai Chamber of Commerce, and Mr. Zamadeh Nigatu, Global Chairman of Fairfax Africa Fund, and Mr. Paul Reynolds, Managing Partner at Renew Strategies. And this session will be moderated by His Excellency Dr. Ethiopian, State Minister of Finance. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I would leave the floor for my chairperson of the session and the panelists as well.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this panel, and apologies for the delay. Most of you are here this morning, so the morning session took a bit longer. And for those that are following us online, I really want to apologize for starting this a bit late. We have a very interesting panel here, quite fascinating, really. I mean, a mix of people that come from different background. We have Mr. Omar Khan, who is Director of International Offices, Dubai Chamber of Commerce. So he came here with a big team. I know the Chamber has been working very closely with the Ministry on this. Thank you so much. We have Mr. Zamadena Negatu, who is the Chairman of Fairfax Africa Fund. But you know Zamadena way back, I'm sure, from his consulting days. EY, that was really his brand. He's now moving into equity investment and someone who knows Ethiopian economy quite well. So it would be wonderful to hear your thoughts on this. And we have Mr. Paul Reynolds, Managing Director, Renew Strategies. Paul has been here quite a lot. Paul believes he is Ethiopian. He always says, don't look at my color, my heart is Ethiopian. So I'm really glad that you have all joined me here. Thank you so much for coming. So I think we have about 50 minutes, so we really need to make the best use of this time. What I would really like to do is to give you a context of why we're here. And first of all, I really want to applaud the Ministry of Trade for organizing this timely session. I think this is wonderful, way ahead of time. We've just launched our plan, but already the ministry is thinking through how we can realize this through investment. Thank you so much. And this morning, you've seen the excellent job they have done in articulating the sector's gap and opportunities. I mean, generally, as a country, transport sector has been an integral part of our development priority. We've done some commendable job historically, you know, in terms of road access, a threefold increase since 2010 alone. We invested in rail, you know, despite some problems in efficiency and so on. But you know, we have 2 rail lines, airports, dry port. But what we have in mind the next 10 years is huge. As you've seen, we have very ambitious and multifaceted plan that focuses on infrastructure development, but also on quality of service delivery. So whatever we've done before, as our reform really tries to achieve, we want to improve all shortcomings, but also critical targets. I don't want to go through the numbers because you've seen this morning, but a 50% increase in dry ports, 8 more standardized airports, the number of Addis Ababa rail passengers from 75 to 200,000, you know, international flight passengers from 10.2 to 48.4 million, fourfold. I can go on, but you've seen the numbers this morning and you know where we really want to head. But what I worry about, as someone who comes from Ministry of Finance, and I think Ministry of Transport already started worrying about this, is can the government do all these things alone? The answer is a strong no. That is why we're really focusing on private sector participation. So before I delve into the discussion with these experts who can really tell us how we can mobilize the private sector participation into the transport sector, I just want to remind you where we've come from in terms of the overall economic reform. You know, we are in the midst of the homegrown economic reform program. You know, we have macro, sectoral, and structural reforms in one go as a package, and we've moved significantly ahead despite the challenge of COVID. Despite a number of challenges, the resilience of this economy, I think, has been vindicated. And what we've managed to achieve over the last year and a half is phenomenal in all sense of the word. It's not just about the GDP growth of 6.1%, while the whole world is still growing negative terms. I'm not growing below zero. But if you look at our export, our revenue, these have significantly increased. 12% increase in exports. In fact, We've not seen such an increase in 6-7 years. Revenue collection has increased by about 16%. Phenomenal. We've now reached 1,000 mark in terms of GDP per capita. We've surpassed that. This was a critical milestone for economic development. But whatever we've done, I think compared to what we need to do, we have a long way to go. So that's what we need to talk about. I mean, we're ready. All the software and the hardware is in place. We have, as you know, reviewed our investment law. There is no restrictions in many sectors now, including transport, as we've discussed this morning. But how do we make sure the private sector is fully in is a critical question. So to my panel, I really want you to focus into these issues. I'll come back in the middle if need be. But I want to start off by a more broader question. Probably I will open this to three of you. You can respond. So despite what we're saying, from your vantage point, what most excites and concerns you in the current Ethiopian economy? The government has been undertaking a broad-based reforms for close to 2 years now. So what is your take? How do you see us? Are we on the right track? What are the concerns? What are exciting things? Roman, we should start now.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you to the Ministry and the Minister of Transport for organizing this. It's such a great honor. I was looking through the 10-year plan recently today, doing my homework. And one of the most important things and exciting things that we have seen is because we have been here since 2013 with our international offices. We have seen the trend, and we have seen a very big jump in the last 3-4 years. We have seen new faces. We have seen younger, energetic faces in different authorities and entities, and even new ones. And it's actually very, very confident raising. And one of the things we saw in the plan is it's very ambitious. It's studying everything, but it's extremely honest with itself. It is doing the SWOT analysis. It's talking about the strength, the opportunity, as well as the weakness. It's also looking at the Growth and Transformation Plan 1 and 2, and it addresses how much was their target, but it's also saying, here's where the shortfall was. And this is something very refreshing. It's very new, where we all as a group can be very honest about the challenges, and that's when we have that, we can easily work together to fill in the gaps and turn the gaps into opportunities. Now, this is from a very wide level. The other part of it is, of course, and I know DP World is here, Mr. Sahel Benna, the Managing Director of DP World, will be speaking, but logistics and transportation is our bread and butter. 73% of the income of Dubai is through services. We always talk about trade and investment, but this is another area of services, logistics, and transport that Dubai and the UAE has as a strength. And we are very excited to want to be a part of the story. So we have been waiting for a while, but I think it's coming at the right time, and we are very excited. And one very important thing we want to do, and we promise to do, is to raise up the flag when it comes to news and changes and positive ones like these, because the world is full of usually unrelated news that decision makers and 260,000 members of our business community usually can't take action on. This is something very relevant, and we will be engaging, and we hope to see small prototypes and projects being successful. And with each milestone, we will work with our partners here in the private and public sector to actually showcase the success. And then you will get a snowball effect. This is what excites us.
Thank you. To Marina.
Okay. First of all, thank you for the invitation to be here, to the Ministry of Transport and obviously Minister Ayub. You asked the question, how do we see the Ethiopian economy? I think that you are asking a macro question, and then I think we'll delve a little better in the next round. So from our perspective, certainly I run an American private equity firm that's focused almost exclusively investing in Africa, and including in Ethiopia. We have a number of investments in Ethiopia. So it goes without saying that we're very bullish as usual on Ethiopia, but that's based on substance, right? Numbers. And 3 weeks ago, I think I saw a number that excited a lot of people, certainly in our partners in the United States. The IMF is forecasting the Ethiopian economy to grow by almost 9%, 21-22, 8.7 to be exact, but less rounded. So these are very strong indicators, and this is coming from the IMF. So I'm sure the ministry has its own numbers, maybe slightly higher or slightly lower. But these are the kinds of indicators that we look for before people make investments anywhere in the world, and in particular in Ethiopia. From a big picture perspective, the numbers have been discussed with a lot of people this morning, how big Ethiopia is. But related to the transport sector, I mean, Ethiopia is geographically, not only is it big, but it's a big, rugged country. So that means it needs very sophisticated transport to get the goods out to the public, both domestically and globally. So these kinds of initiatives, when I was telling some of my colleagues that we're going to be talking about investments in the transport sector in Ethiopia, I said, which ones? And I said, almost everything. I saw the strategy, and I said, almost everything is open now to international investors, whether it's a JV or a PPP, and some of it is for domestic. So we're excited. I saw your numbers yesterday. I think the PM said it was 6.1%. There's some slightly lower figures, but just that was for last year, by the way. Okay, that was during COVID. So if Ethiopia can deliver those kinds of numbers, I was in the U.S. the whole year last year. I can tell you, the U.S. economy, the global economy was in a recession. Africa as a whole was in the negative. So to even eke out 2 or 3 or even 6% shows the resiliency of the economy. So imagine when things normalize, when post-COVID, as what we're getting into, then a lot of these reforms, transport and other sectors, I think would deliver on the promises that you've made on the 10-year. So we're very excited. We have a very large group of institutional investors who are actually very eager to hear. And I've already distributed the strategy you sent me. People are asking, they just want substance. And then we'll talk about the details of what it is that people are looking for when they decide to write it, before they decide to write a check. I think that'll be on the next round of questions. Thank you.
Mr. Reynolds?
Thank you, Eop. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I represent a private equity business as well. We focus primarily on small and medium-sized enterprises. And I think the way that the private equity community would look at this is actually extremely positive relative to the way these things have been done in the past. So a little bit of Omar's point. The outside world wants to know what the strategic plan is for the country, 10 plus years. The outside world wants to know what the strategic plan is for each sector and each related sector, and the outside world wants to know the data that underpins the analysis. And I think, if I'm not wrong, for the first time, we have a plan which is incredibly long-term and incredibly detailed. So that is very, very positive as far as external investors are concerned. The issue from an investment perspective, obviously, is about predictability and volatility of returns. We can see the bull case for Ethiopia is made very effectively this morning, both in writing in the brochures and in the video. We can see what the potential is in a country of this size, in a country with these resources. But we also want to know how the volatility of the expected returns are going to be managed. Specifically, I'm talking obviously about the regulatory environment. So the question that remains is, to what extent will the challenges that we refer to be addressed either over time or on an ad hoc basis where the sector, for example, the Ministry of Transport, is trying to attract external capital, because you can solve people's volatility issues with specific services provided to investors.
Thank you so much. In fact, that leads us to what I really wanted to ask. Second, Mr. Zamarian, let me start from you. So you saw the plan that was laid out this morning, very ambitious 10 years perspective plan. The investment required for this is about 75 billion USD, about 3 trillion birr, I guess. A number of projects have been identified. So what does it take for these projects to change from being our list, the government's wishful list, to your investors list? Maybe you can start, and Mr. Omar, you would add a little bit on this. So what does it take for the investors to see this as a potential opportunity?
You want me to? Oh, yes. Sorry. Okay, so I've come up with a term to describe what we saw today, and I call it BBA, big, bold, ambitious. And that's the way it should be. It's a big country, and it needs to think big and deliver big. And it can do that. I mean, we've seen it in the transport sector. I remember 15 years ago, nobody thought Ethiopian Airlines would be where it is today. I can tell you because we did the study, we were on the strategy team, I led the team, and a lot of people who said, "This, you guys are crazy. There's no way Ethiopian Airlines will be the biggest airline in Africa." And that was only 14, 15 years ago. So again, in the transport sector. So the BBA for me is real. It needs, however, and to put it in context, as you said, it's 3 trillion birr. Now we talk in trillions in Ethiopia. We used to talk only in millions, if not too long ago, which is good. That's about $74, $75 billion over 10 years. If you average it, that's about 7.5 billion per year. So I was trying to put that in context. Africa as a whole every year invests about 100 billion on infrastructure. Africa as a whole, on every infrastructure for Africa. Now there's a gap of financing gap between 50 and 70 billion in Africa. So to put that in context, Ethiopia alone is going to take what, 8%, right, of all of Africa's just for transport sector. And it should be. As I said earlier, it's a big country geographically. How big is it? It's France and Spain combined are smaller than Ethiopia geographically, and 112 million people. So that's why I think the boldness is right. But we have to make sure we can monetize it, we can deliver. So some of the things I was just looking at is, from an investor's perspective, there are issues that, topics that investors will always ask, which I think they'll talk to you all the time. The macro issues, for example. Because these investments, especially coming from abroad, are in foreign exchange. They come in hard currency. But a lot of the revenues, there are exceptions, a lot of the revenues are in local currency in birr. So they'll be asking, how do we manage the mismatching of the currency between revenue and local currency, but capex in dollars, right? I mean, we've had discussion in other sectors. So that would be something I think the Minister of Transport, Minister of Finance, and others, I know I'm going to use Minister Eyoop's favorite term, which would be foreign exchange issues will not be a permanent feature of Ethiopia. That's what he keeps telling us, right? And that needs to be, the messaging has to continue, but also in practical terms, right? I mean, that's the strategy. So if you do that, for example, you strip away one risk factor. The point here is the Ministry of Transport and the Ethiopian government has to continue to make sure we de-risk the perception of risk, as well as the actual risk, like the practical ones that I talk about from a currency perspective, okay? Also, a lot of these deals are being done by PPPs, right? Okay, you need to assure the investors that PPP contracts won't just be terminated arbitrarily. And this is from experiences we have in Asia and other places, because the sunken cost for private sector upfront is a lot. So if you terminate it once they've done that. So again, I'm talking about de-risking here, because the opportunity is already obvious. We've discussed it, it's there. But from a practical point of view, when we go to investment committees to get these things approved, these will be the types of things people ask, practical. Before I write, I love them in. I love the opportunity you showed us, the numbers and everything, but how do we de-risk it from an investor's perspective? Because people are looking for other countries as well to put their money, although there aren't as many opportunities. Okay, regulation, I think was mentioned earlier. Regulation is key, robust regulation. I know you have a PPP unit in the Ministry of Finance, I think, right? Make sure that the regulations are up to speed, they're best practices. Not only are they on paper, but they're enforced properly to make sure. So I have a whole list, but I obviously we're a panel discussion here, but the practical side of it is what we need to focus on, okay? Finally though, on this point, where would investors be attracted, and I'll be very frank, is where the revenue stream is predictable, where they can see the earnings, right? Again, so in those areas where the government, and some of the projects that were listed here, they're attractive and the country needs it, but you have to understand from an investor's perspective, they may not be the kinds of returns of investment that they bring the others do. So for those let's call it less than attractive, the government has to give special incentives to attract private capital. But overall, I think, it's attractive. A lot of people will come. We're very excited this sector is finally opening up in a massive way that you've done. So you should be congratulated. And then we'll come back to a few others that I have, what we can do to build up the local capacity of Ethiopians to participate in the infrastructure sector, both in JV and in PPPs. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Omar, maybe if I'll give Mr. Anders another question. So if you could comment on this.
Well, just to reiterate, I have a background in customer service. And what is happening, Ethiopia is wooing investors to come in. It's a customer service issue where we're saying, come and buy my product. And the customers, let's say, if they say no, it's very important to understand and ask them why. What is missing in the supply chain, the steps that lead you to de-risking, to have predictability, and that's the most important part. And for many, like I said, for many years, we have seen a disconnect, and like I said now, even in the SWOT analysis itself of the transport 10-year plan is talking about stability, it's talking about political stability as well, so on and so forth, knowing that that's something on the investor's mind. So it's showing that we're synchronized. And what I would recommend for me as well is prototyping projects, using projects in like a laboratory controlled method, a low-hanging fruit project that you can create a success with, and then you can even promote. And then it sort of creates a snowball effect as you choose the right projects to highlight and uplift. For us, one very simple example that we did in Dubai very long ago was Burj Al Arab. It's the 7-star hotel. I was in HSBC and I spoke to the old timers, and they said when this came up for financing, they said this would never ever make money. But they were not thinking about the collateral, the image, the branding, and what mileage we would get out of this hotel, not just as a hospitality venue, but as a symbol for marketing, promoting Dubai. And even for 2 decades, it was people would come, they didn't want to see the Palm, they didn't want to see Burj Khalifa, they were asking, where is your 7-star hotel? And again, and this communication, whether it's about the change in regulations, change in de-risking, and maybe even covering the exchange risks as well in the long term, these are very important, but I think also prototyping some of the projects that you can initiate, that you can get investors to come on board quickly, and you can show success stories is very important to the long-term awareness where people get excited about Ethiopia, and I know they will.
Mr. Reynolds, let me reframe the question, and because you're talking about regulation. So what would you like to see change for enhanced private sector engagement in the transport sector? What potential challenge do you foresee for the engagement of the private sector, and what needs to be done in correcting this? I mean, you've been here, you've seen part of the frustration of the private sector. So I want you to be specific. What more do we need to, in addition to what we've done already?
Sure. I think one of the cultural changes which we are watching and which are critical for success of the economy and success of the 10-year transport plan is the engagement of the private sector. So to some extent, this is nothing new, right? The private sector has been driving economies all over the world for thousands of years. But we have a situation in Ethiopia where it really is a very recent phenomenon in practice. And I think a lot of investors will look at that and say, okay, I read the plan and it talks about gradual opening up of this, gradual opening up of that. And I go, so is it open or is it not open? Is it public sector or is it private sector? It's a gradual change. My advice would be to some comments made earlier about leapfrogging to the bold and ambitious plan is make some massive jumps. By degrees will take us forever. And Zemadena referenced the competition. There are other countries, although perhaps with not as great potential, who are making every day more progress in improving their ease of doing business than we are here. So every day, even though we're trying and we're improving, we are still falling behind the competition when it comes to ease of doing business, for example. And the other side of that coin is the genuine commitment to opening the private sector, opening the economy to the private sector. So I would say empowering the private sector, really making the private sector believe that it's a good thing, is something which we should spend more time from a communication perspective on. So I know a few of you are going to be out canvassing over the next few months, and you'll be going to see your constituents, and they'll be saying, why should I, the voter, trust you, the government? I think actually the real question for us here is the other way around, which is, does the government trust the private sector? Does the government trust the people, yes or no? And if the government does trust the private sector, if the government does trust the people, then it should make a huge leapfrogging change in the way that regulation is both designed and implemented. That would be my sort of primary bit of advice. Because the outside world is looking at it and saying, we see the direction of travel and we love it. But we have plenty of things to do in the next 18 to 36 months. We'll come back when this gradual change is more evident. And the second thing I would say, again, it's about communication. It probably falls to you, Eob, rather than the Ministry of Transport, is we see the changes in terms of liberalization. But the single most enabling sector after transport, or possibly even before transport, is financial services. So all the private sector activity that we envisage being embedded in this 2 trillion birr worth of private sector financing requires a private sector financial services environment which is fit for purpose. And today, it's not fit for purpose. Now, we understand, both in terms of foreign exchange and liberalization of the banking sector, these things are coming and the plans are underway, and there are various commitments to global bodies about deregulation of the exchange rate, for example, in 2021, 2022, and 23. What investors want to see is a roadmap and deliverables which have been delivered, and they want to see clearer commitment, evidence of commitment to that direction of travel. Because once you do that, the market moves ahead of you.
Yeah, very good point. I mean, it's phenomenal how far we have come. Sometimes, even for me, honestly, as someone who is part of this process, when I woke up, the next day, looking back at where we are, mindset, we've come significantly forward. I mean, the role of the private sector, for instance. I remember arguing about this from the fringe, saying the government needs to take the private sector seriously. But now, our default thinking has become, how do we enhance the role of the private sector? When the other week, Ministry of Agriculture was thinking about quarantine sites, a project that has been in problem for like decades. I hear about quarantine project for cattle animal export, but it was not moving. But now we're talking about public-private partnership where that quarantine site can be managed by private sector. And I tell you, this is going to change everything. About locust invasion, we always run behind. And locust comes and we try and mobilize airplanes from all parts of the world. But that mindset has changed now. We're thinking about, okay, why don't we actually get ready for? Why don't we buy our own fleets and work with the private sector for this? If the locust comes, we fight it. If not, we rent it out for those that are renting. For this is the business mindset. So something big has changed, has shifted in Ethiopian policy-making perspective. But I hear you, and the next phase would be the financial sector, as we've been saying repeatedly, is the next area of reform. Is inevitable. I mean, definitely we're heading there. To the Medina, for your point about Forex, now the primary, the defining feature of the Ethiopian economy. I give you my word. I mean, I see it coming. There is this story about a fox, a shepherd and a fox. They say there was a shepherd who wrongly, like lyingly says, "Oh, a fox is here," and every people come out and then try to rescue him. In fact, there is no fox there. He did this 2 times, 3 times, and the last time when actually a fox came, people in the neighborhood did not come out because they thought he was lying. So the fox is coming, so trust me, for sure, and things are changing, and we're doing it the right way. But because you talked about PPP, I want to start from you on this one. We thought PPP is the main instrument for private sector engagement, and as you mentioned, we've done a number of things in overhauling the right regulatory framework for this. The legal and policy framework, as you know, has been established. We think it's robust. But it would be good to hear your thoughts. What are the best practices which we need to tap into, specifically in transport sector, but generally in PPP? Are we right? I mean, we've been like bidding projects. We have one solar project that is ongoing now, being financed, about 8-10 now in the pipeline. But what do we need to do differently, or where are we as far as public-private partnership is concerned? You take this, and Mr. Khan, probably you would add a little bit if you want to on this.
Sure. So this is a very good point you're raising, how to make this PP effective. I have some thoughts, and we can use examples we've done in other places or we're thinking of doing. One of the things that was mentioned here earlier, and we talk about this all the time in Ethiopia, the private sector is very young, therefore is challenged by what I call the 2 C's. And this is even before we get to huge investment projects like infrastructure. It's challenged by financial capital, constrained by financial capital, and by human capital, right? This is just even to run retail businesses or small run-of-the-mill businesses. Imagine you saw the budgets of a lot of these things. There are some of them, the small ones are in a few million, others are in the billions, right? So my point is, when we think of PPP, we have to make sure the Ethiopian private sector has a role. But how do we do that when, as I said, it's constrained? One of the solutions, and we were just discussing this the other day, we're looking at with others to set up an infrastructure fund in Africa. I was just suggesting maybe we set up an infrastructure fund for Ethiopia, or let's say the Horn of Africa, because Ethiopia is the anchor, whereby the Ethiopian private sector can come in and participate through that fund. Because individually, these projects are hard to finance. So, I mean, our good friends from DP World, I mean, they're big, they're a multi-billion-dollar company. They can come and do these things on their own, and they will be able to do that. But wouldn't we want them to partner with local Ethiopian investors? So DP or any I don't want to pick on our friends from DP, but any big company would say, why would I partner with an Ethiopian when they don't have the financial that I need, and I have it? And I have the global technology, know-how, expertise. So what we need to do is find a way. So this infrastructure fund will help Ethiopians participate in that process, but with a fraction of the cost if they were to try to do it individually by partnering with these big companies. Okay, that's one solution that I would suggest, is set up a fund or some kind of incentive mechanism for the big international companies to partner with Ethiopians. Otherwise, the Ethiopian private sector would have very limited role in all these beautiful projects that you've set out. Okay, so that should be a priority. Second thing, how do we structure the financing of these projects? I mean, this is something we do all the time. We usually set up SPVs, right, special purpose vehicle, because this is project financing. So we need to bring in and make sure that the DFIs are involved from a macro perspective. The DFIs who have a longer outlook will come in and become the anchor investors. Then the private equity funds and others can come in when you have. So when you structure these things, when you're thinking about all these projects, make sure the likes of the African Development Bank, the World Bank, and others who have an interest. And I got to tell you right now, there's a lot of money out there today around the world, especially the minute you put green, there are people willing to throw money at it. It's just that you have to be smart how you structure these things and think like, what would the private sector, how do the private sector structure it? If you do that, because as you said, I think you use global best practices to set up the PPP unit, the regulations. On paper, I don't think there's any issue with that, but to make sure that they deliver the results, we need to think like, who is investing? How do they think? How do we partner? And importantly, include the Ethiopian private sector to these kinds of mechanisms. And I'll let our...
Mr. Khan, I want you to add, the experience in UAE in general as well on how this has worked. Yes.
For many of the projects that the UAE government, even in the infrastructure, let's say of a road or a bridge for the Road and Transport Authority, a lot of them are even SPVs in the Dubai financial free zone as well. So based on our performance, based on our delivery, we think, okay, well, why finance it directly when we can funds for that? And like my colleague said, it's a customer service issue. Think how the private sector thinks. Think of the questions that they will ask. Answer them before they are asked, like in the reports. And like I said, I'm thinking also of the private sector participation, because the big difference between Dubai and UAE and Ethiopia is the need, the stronger need for creation of employment and opportunities for the private sector. So also this is a challenge, and this is a great way to help them participate, because and what's important also is to acknowledge, if you want to achieve what you want to achieve in the time that you do, identify what is available and identify what is missing. the same, it's more difficult here because the pressure for creating jobs and participation of the private sector is higher here. But this is this is something that we identified, whether it's for the extraction of oil, whether it's the building of the airports, whether it's bringing in the know-how for hospitality, which we learned from Thailand and Singapore and other places first, and before we actually, and even finance, before we actually took it over. So again, this is very important to see what you can plug in locally, and then see for the mid to long term what you need, and then of course eventually have a plan as well for inclusivity as the talent, as the expertise, as the private sector learns to collaborate and synergize, and you have smaller SMEs becoming bigger companies. We saw this happen through our generations. That's very important. But if you want to get to where you want to, it's important to know what we have and what we don't have on the table. And like I said, I always tell people, answer the questions before they're asked. That always leaves an amazing impression on the investors.
Very good. We're coming to the last question. But one interesting point you've mentioned in terms of the role of the institutional investor, the DFIs. State Minister Yasmin has a session right after this. I hope you would explore these issues as well, how the critical investment can be leveraged through donor investment and so on. This would be an interesting question that the next panel would definitely address. But I'll start from Mr. Reynolds, and I'll give you all a chance. I want you to give us your final thoughts. But as you do that, focus on approach. What approach should the Ministry of Transport and the government in general take in terms of attracting serious, workable investment into this sector? What do you leave behind, Minister, so that she can take it away with her and the whole team can work on? And also, any additional thoughts? I'll give you each 3-4 minutes, so please give us your final thoughts. I start from Mr. Reynolds.
Thank you again. Yeah, so to mobilize private sector capital, you have to address volatility of returns. So I think if I was in the position of the Ministry of Transport, also the Ministry of Finance, I would say, what are the biggest sources of volatility, unexpected outcomes when it comes to these sorts of projects? I mean, I've worked with PPPs for an embarrassing number of decades, and my short, simple summary is PPPs are the simplest way of transferring value from taxpayers to the private sector. So I would just be very clear in the way I approached it, laying out transparently in the form of what we'd call a risk matrix. What risks are being absorbed by the country? What risks are being absorbed by the regional government or the local government? What risks are being absorbed by each of the counterparties in the transaction? And make it very clear contractually how those risks are mitigated, transferred, and then compensated should they arise, which then leads to two practical solutions. Number one, the biggest issue that private sector investors will face here is this uncertainty, the regulatory environment. And if I was in the minister's position, I would say, I'm going to deal with that. I'm going to deal with it super clear. I will agree a service level agreement for private sector investors when it comes to regulatory delivery. When it comes to interacting with the government, I will ensure that nothing happens that is not in your plan. So the Ministry of Transport would essentially set up a team of people, a bit like the EIC. I know there are resource issues, which would say, I am the customer service representative. I take this project, I take your involvement in this project, and I make this project happen with you. Not for you, but with you, as part of the Ministry of Transport itself. Number two, to just elaborate on Zemadena's point, the risks that international investors can't take or don't want to take relate to Ethiopian political risk, Ethiopian regulatory risk. That is the risk that the government can actually, by definition, define, measure, and take itself. So I think the way most other countries would deal with this is by providing risk capital into the funding structures, either on a project-by-project basis, which is less efficient, or on a portfolio or a fund basis. So the government of Ethiopia would take off risk. I provide some kind of equity-like guarantee, or provide equity-like capital into the funding for the over 2 trillion birr of private sector projects. That could be established as a fund itself, offshore probably, and the government then could absorb that risk financially as well as operationally, and that would make it very easy for international investors to participate?
So some practical recommendations. First is messaging. Sustained messaging. Like today, even for most people in this room, this is the first time you've seen that all these opportunities actually exist. So that needs to, imagine for those who are not here, for those we're trying to attract from abroad. So sustained messaging that this sector is opening up, very specific, okay? Second, investors, especially the big infrastructure investors, they get pitched every single day. I mean, I can tell you, I get proposals, unsolicited, whatever, almost every day, right? So what you want to do is make it easy for them to pay attention to what is Ethiopia doing. So prioritize the ones you want to get financing for, put some effort and resource into it, and put together bankable documents. It could be high level, but bankable documents so that they don't have to do all the hard work. These people are lazy anyways. They will go to who's preparing them the best, the easiest thing to do, but that will be very important. Third, if you have any success stories, keep telling those stories. Nothing attracts investors more than success story, because we all talk. There's a small community, and they say, well, you know, Ethiopia, I did well. I did this project. Of course, you know what happens on the reverse side as well, right? So make sure, highlight, I mean, the success of Ethiopian Airlines, you can't believe how much it branded Ethiopia as a country, and we can do it. Spirit is there. Oh, the Ethiopians built the largest airline in Africa. Wow. That's a key. So that's just the kind of success story. So in some of the ones that you have listed today, pick one or two that you think are slam dunks. Investors will come in and do well, and you can tell that using that as a success story. I mean, this is very important. A lot of the things, I mean, we talked about the ease of doing business, all that. I think we can address that as we go along. You can tell what you're doing. I mean, committees have been set up, reforms in the investment code have been made, a lot of things. That will take a little while before it gets there, but you can also tell it. But these are the simple ones I think will do well, in addition to the substance we talked about earlier. So in summary, and by the way, a lot of these things here, they're easy to sell, because investors, I mean, if you were to tell me invest in an express toll road, all I have to do is, beyond all the issues, that if the revenue stream is predictable and I can get an ROI that I can show to my investors, that's an easy sell. To the minister, I suggest some of your projects here are hard to sell to investors, right? So let's be realistic. Maybe they take longer, but some, the big ones, where we can identify the revenue, we can quantify the margins for investors, focus on those, show those to investors, and believe me, you will attract investors. And then the rest will come. Okay? So these are just some quick suggestions that I have.
Well, I reiterate and I agree completely with regards to the propagation of success stories. Like you said, there is a me too. There are a fear of missing out when it comes to investors. Most of the world is, like I said, filled with news that's irrelevant, whether it's Harry and Meghan's interview or Kim Kardashian or something like that. You will never see constructive news within, let's say, covering the African continent unless you dig deep. So that's very important, to raise the success story, put the microscope on it. And one of the things that I think of sometimes, it's very important, again, the customer service thing. When we at one point were trying to push the private sector, the government was trying to push to invest and develop real estate in the late 90s. They were like, no, sorry, we are traders. We're not real estate developers. So the government has to identify where there are gaps and bring either investors who are interested, or take the bold move, as Mrs. Abedega says, to actually step in there. And then everybody jumped in. Once they saw the ball rolling, they jumped in. And like I said, it's very important to start with a prototype project. Like you said, slam dunk. That's very important to showcase everything that goes through. And it's a great idea to have. There's a lot of young people that I've seen, whether it's in TV, whether it's production, in business, in government. Yesterday I was meeting with the bank, Land Bank Development Commission. And I met with the CEO, and it's a new entity. And when we were talking in the same frequency, in the same language, talking about investments, return, risks. And I was like very, very pleasantly surprised to see somebody like that there. And I'm sure there's 100 million people here. I'm sure there are a lot of hungry, eager young people, very eager for change and very eager to prove themselves. And I think sometimes in the office, I always try to hold everything and try to do things myself, but I find myself so pleasantly surprised when I open the responsibility gates and I allow the team to run with things. They come back with ideas and initiatives that really, really impress me. So as you said, you know, it's very important to have that customer hand-holding journey on these projects, monitor them. Social media is important. Like I said, there's not enough positive and constructive news that we see from them. And we know this, we're from the Middle East as well, and from Africa. So we know what this is. So we have to pump it out ourselves. So again, and we are committed to helping with that. Thank you.
Excellent. A very good point to take on. We are holding it all together. I like that phrase. This is what we are doing as government, and we're trying to do everything on our own. Never worked. And if there is a phrase that really defines the central pillar of our reform, is private sector participation, and in a very meaningful way. And I think this panel has shedded some useful lights on how private sector can participate in the Ethiopian economy. Very practical suggestions have come through. I think what we've learned is all these projects that have been lined up are critical projects. They have been financed and funded by private sector. Elsewhere, there is best practice globally. What we need to do is, first of all, make sure the information is out. We need to communicate, and we need to put our house in order because we have to make sure the domestic private sector is part and parcel of this. And as you've seen in the presentation this morning, some of these projects deliberately have been identified as JV projects. The whole notion is we need to make sure the domestic private sector also takes part in this. Exciting years ahead. Look, I came this morning from on my way here. Would say I got the right way. I think I got trapped, or I got forced into going into a wheat farm close to Adama area, and the farmer was saying a very fascinating thing. He said, "Look," he said, "I was hesitant when this idea of substituting wheat by producing in Ethiopia, that it would benefit us, that it would benefit the country. When people from Ministry of Agri were coming and preaching this, he said, I was very hesitant. He said it took 5 meetings, 6 meetings. But today you can see the excitement in his face. He was in the middle of the farm, like proudly looking at that beautiful farm. He said, today I'm talking about harvesting this using combiner. There is no way we can harvest this using human labor. And they said the right information, the right support has brought us here. So the right information, we have to make sure people here and abroad get the right information. So I really like to commend the Ministry of Transport team for organizing this panel. Again, I think it was a very useful discussion. I hope you found this panel useful as well in going forward. This country is going to make it. Whether you're like, there is this character in Bible called Thomas. I can't believe unless I touch it, is what he said. So it's, you can believe it now, or you can believe it in a few years down the road, but this country is going to make it. Ethiopia is going to be an African beacon of prosperity. We're not worried about the current challenge because we see through where we're heading. And please join us in this journey. Thank you so much.
Absolutely fascinating discussion and impeccably perfect timing in my moderators, the management. Please thank all the panelists for me before they leave. A round of applause for all of them, including my moderator. Thank you so much. This was really, really helpful. I wanted to capture as many things as I could as these gentlemen discussed pertinent issues, but I couldn't. It was very tough for me to catch up. But I sort of tried to jot down the 4 points Ato Zamadin has shared with us as practical, what he called practical recommendations. One is, just like today, we have to be open and consistent about specific investment opportunities that we have in different sectors in this country. Just as the Ministry of Transport came up with 5 subsectors and 44 specific projects where private sector and the international community can invest in. And another practical point he mentioned is that make it easy for investors to come and easily invest, which is, I guess, something we're doing as a nation. A third point he mentioned is tell success stories. What have we done successfully before? If the more we tell those successful stories, as the more we can attract more investors. And finally, he said, boil the investment opportunities down to the very practical ones that you want prioritized, narrow them down, narrow the options to the more prioritized areas so that people can specifically focus on those. So if I were not mistaken, this is very practically useful for the ministry as well. So with this, we're going to go to the video we skipped earlier. We're going to use it as a break now, but it's going to inform you a lot on what the Ministry of Transport is about. So it's going to be Ministry of Transport at a glance. After that video, we're going to come back for the second session. And then after that session, we will break for coffee. So please enjoy the video.
A unique country, modest with its exquisite terrain, pristine lakes and falls, as humble as any place where a heroic soul belongs, steeped in ancient history and known proudly as the cradle of humankind, coffee capital of the gloriously flourishing, peaking in momentum towards economic, political, and social transformation and looking forward to a prosperous future. Ethiopia, a new horizon of hope. The country is moving with speed, breaking walls of division and building new bridges of unity. It is one of the few countries in Africa where women take half of the cabinet seat. Ethiopia has a first female head of state and a female president of the judiciary, and has made significant transformation leaps in foreign policy. Building on the sweeping political reforms that he unleashed, Prime Minister Dr. Abiy Ahmed announced that the partial privatization of state-owned enterprises in energy, telecom, logistics, and aviation sectors represents the fundamental opening of the Ethiopian economy. Ethiopia is leading a new frontier of effective regional integration of the entire continent. The economy has enjoyed double-digit growth over the past decade, asserting itself as one of the world's fastest-growing economies. As the second-largest recipient of foreign direct investment in Africa, Ethiopia has attracted many global brands, highlighting the competitive investment opportunity that it yields. With a crystal vision for 2025, Ethiopia aims to be the leading manufacturing hub in Africa and a preferred destination for foreign direct investment. So why invest? We are a young and productive age group that accounts for 60% of the population of 105 million people, trainable and available at competitive wages. With duty-free and quota-free access to major export destinations, including US and EU markets. A signatory to the African Continental Free Trade Area that unlocks the market potential of 1.2 billion. We are strategically located with proximity to the Middle East, Europe, US, and Asia, offering a wide-ranging incentive package for priority sectors and export-oriented investments. The newly built Addis-Djibouti electric-powered railway connects the capital and other economic corridors to the port of Djibouti. Africa's world-class and Star Alliance member, Ethiopian Airlines, flying to over 100 international destinations and 40-plus dedicated cargo destinations. There is huge investment potential in renewable energy, including hydro, wind, and geothermal. We now have expansive road networks connecting national and regional markets and state-of-the-art industrial parks, both public and privately owned, offering impressive benefits. Ethiopia's policy reforms spearheads industrialization through investment in these sectors: textile and apparel, leather and leather products, agro-processing, horticulture, pharmaceuticals, ICT and electronics, tourism, and energy. As the land of origin rises, with courage and honor, it calls on the world to come and seize the vast investment opportunities. Ethiopia is now open for business.
Excellent, right? I would give this video production a warm round of applause. So exciting, really, really exciting. Thank you so much. You guys did great. Whoever produced it, you did an amazing work. Now, we're going to run into the next session. I want to be as productive as possible because we have so much we want to do and such. And I'm going to call upon my next panel right away. So the next panel session is going to be on opportunity for enhanced engagement of international organizations in the transport sector in Ethiopia. We have 3 panelists this session, and my moderator for this session will be Her Excellency Ms. Yasmin Wahab Rabi. She is the State Minister of Finance, and our panelists include Ms. Xiaoping Wang, Program Leader for Infrastructure and Lead Energy Specialist at the World Bank, and Mr. Daniel Chakol, Regional Deputy Director of Road Safety for Africa and Vital Strategies, and Mr. Dr. Gadamo Dale. He is the country representative of Global Green Growth Institute. So as I'm calling them, they're coming up to take their seats. So we will proceed straight into the discussion, and then we will break for coffee later and then come back for the general discussion. So thank you all so much, and I leave the floor for you now.
Good afternoon, all of you. I just want to start by thanking the Ministry of Transport for organizing this event, which is one in its kind. I hope this will continue in the future as well. It's quite a pleasure to facilitate this session of the panel, and I'm happy to be here with you to lead this conversation, prestigious group on issue of high importance, which is enhancing the engagement of international organization, more broadly the development partners in the transport sector journey. And I have 3 panelists with me. One is Ms. Xiaoping Wang, Program Team Leader and Lead Energy Specialist of the World Bank. As you know, the World Bank is one of our key development partners, but also invested a lot in the infrastructure sector within the transport. And I have also Dr. Daniel Chakol, Regional Deputy Director of Road Safety for Africa and Vital, who is also collaborating very closely with the Minister of Transport. The third panelist is Dr. Gamedo Dala, Country Representative for Global Green Growth Institutions. We call it in short Triple G. And they are also coordinating, collaborating movement of Ethiopia in delivering its green economic resilient strategy, more closely working with the Ministry of Finance and also the Commission. So I would like to thank all the panelists for being here with us today. And I just want to say a few words before I open the panel discussion. As you know that the investment that we made in the transport sector, but more importantly in the infrastructure development, has been one of the driver of the growth in the economy over the last decades. And we have also achieved a lot of results from that. We have multiplied our per capita to GDP even 10-fold. We have reduced our poverty by half. We have also increased our access to transport and logistics services, which is very immense. But this hasn't happened without any challenge. And this massive investment in the infrastructure didn't bring us the transformation of that we really sought. And it has resulted us also with high debt accumulation. It has also led to foreign exchange scarcity, of course, also aggravated inflation, but also, I mean, crowded out the private sector engagement. So that's why we have embarked a year and a half ago the homegrown economic reform, which tries also to address the macroeconomic imbalances, focusing on, I mean, bringing the debt risk to moderate level, curtailing inflation, and also improving the foreign exchange reserve. And this is very critical, and knowing also the potential of the transport sector, but most importantly, to the 10 years perspective plan, which was presented in front of us today, also, I mean, identified areas where we can enhance the infrastructure, where we can, I mean, improve service delivery, and where we can also bring in private sector, engagement more broadly, but also, I mean, improve the inefficiencies in terms of execution. So in the past also, what I want to mention is the government of Ethiopia has also invested a lot in the transport sector, but our key development partners also were playing their roles, even now in the reform, where they engage with us in terms of technically and how this reform is going to be very instrumental for the journey that we really sought to have. With this, I would also want to indicate that our development partners support closely, I mean, covered about to 5% of the GDP. And I have been looking also at the data over the last 10 years, where disbursement overall to the economy from our development partners amounted to $33 billion, of which 10% went to the transport sector, which is really important. And from today's, what we have learned is also across the 5 subsectors, we have 44 feasible projects at different stages, and where these are an opportunity for all to start with and invest. So it's our goal, I mean, in the coming years, as a Ministry of Finance as well, we have laid out our 10-year perspective plan, where we wanted to really boost the domestic mobilization, but at the same time also engagements with our development partners to induce the resources that we need. But more importantly, as my colleague Dr. Eyob was indicating, that we have clearly laid out the policies, legal framework and guidelines when it comes to public-private partnerships, where we want to bring the new resources to the sectors. So this is also basically on the infrastructure sector, where transport sector becomes also one in the line. So the 10 years transport development goals are quite ambitious, I want to be honest, but I don't see, and I don't say that they are not achievable, but it requires a lot of stretching and also, I mean, leadership in terms of execution. So it's estimated also to require 74 billion USD, which is quite big. So it doesn't mean by any standard that we are going to finance it as a government. And so we have to look into diverse resources, starting from domestic public to private finance, to international public and private finance, which is also looking into the blending modalities. So I just want to really emphasize that at the early stage of this journey, of course, the public finance would be very instrumental. When we say public, always we also consider that our development partners are in it. So this would help us to kind of mobilize catalytic injection, at the same time also de-risking private resources. So this should be done by unlocking key constraints to develop and implement viable projects, and also improving private sector access to finance is very critical, and de-risking and providing guarantee to private investment is very key. I'm not saying that we have it now, but it's something that we should be focusing along the reform that we are on the financial sector. So I just want to say that with this backdrop, I will now bring the discussions to our panelists to hear where they see the international partners or the broader development partners can make the biggest impact in financing transport sector formation in Ethiopia. So I just want to start with a question to Ms. Jean-Ping from the World Bank. As you see that the Ministry of Transport has embarked the 10 years perspective plan in which it outlines the engagement of our development partners, international organization and the donor community as one source of finance. So how do you see the World Bank role on these particular issues, but also the overall donor community in terms of how they assist the government?
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And it's a real pleasure to be here. We at the World Bank has had a very long and robust partnership with Ethiopia. Indeed, our very first project in Ethiopia back in 1950 was in the transport sector. It's for road rehabilitation for $5 million. And this is just after, I think, Italian left the country where there were so many needs. We focusing on rehabilitating many of the bridges and the roads across the country. And today we are still here. We are only bigger. I would think our partnership are stronger. Where we see our role as well as my peers in the development communities, including multilaterals and bilaterals, I see in really three areas. One is that we aim for long-term collaboration. We are not come and go. We are not going to work on individual projects. We are working on policy framework, regulatory framework, where in addition to project financing individual projects. So that relationship, that trust is very important for us. The second area, we do financing. As some of you know that currently we have ongoing portfolio of nearly $1 billion in the transport sector. And soon, we expect in the next 2 years, this portfolio going to double to nearly $2 billion. The third area, we see that our role is because we are a global development organization in Ethiopia. We work in almost 200 countries around the world. So we have very important role to promote, to facilitate knowledge sharing, and information exchange. And the previous panel talked about the best practices that where we know which countries model can be applicable in certain countries, including we do bring experts in. We also bring people from Ethiopia to other countries to learn. Last but not least, we are an implementing agency. Let's say we are co-implementing with our partner, government partner, private sector. We are very much results oriented. So we do, this is what I really like about this 10-year prospective plan. You set a goal, you set your ambition, you set your goal, you set your results. But this plan also looking back on what has been achieved and what was a gap, what do we learn from it, and what do we aim to achieve in the next 10 years. So we pretty much align with that approach, and I think it's a very good start. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. So first of all, before I reflect to the question, I would like express my sincere appreciation to Her Excellency, as well as Ministry of Transport, higher level officials, really for their exemplary effort in developing very robust and comprehensive transport policy as well as strategy. And this 10 years plan, we set real clear goal and targets to transform the transport sector of the country. So big appreciation for that. So coming to the question, I think international organization can play, have a significant role really on achieving this 10 years perspective plan. The first role is financing or co-financing some of the projects identified by the ministry. Especially the international financial organization can play a crucial catalytic role to facilitate the public-private partnership projects. So there could be various multi projects. One of that is build, own, operate, and transfer. So in that case, the private investors are expected to finance the project. So the international finance organization can provide in terms of debt this this financing. The other role that international organization could play is providing technical assistance, because realizing this project require huge human resources, especially skilled manpower. So by providing various capacity building trainings, especially there are some areas where there could be shortage in local expertise, like transit, railway operation, as well as planning, sustainable transport like BRT, planning, design, operation, and management. So this international organization could play really a crucial role in filling the gap, the skill gap of the implementing human resource. So as vital strategy, our role is basically to support the country, ministry, as well as Addis Ababa technically for improving road safety. So vital strategies and implementing a partner of the Bloomberg Initiative for Global Road Safety. To say a few words about the initiative, the Bloomberg Initiative for Global Road Safety is funded by Bloomberg Philanthropies. So it provides support to 15 countries and 30 cities to improve road safety. So Ethiopia as a country and Addis Ababa as a city is selected to benefit from this technical support for the next 5 years up to 2025. So there are 10 partner organizations which provide various technical support areas. One is road safety policy strengthening. In this regard, we have WHO, GRSP, Global Road Safety Partnership, as well as GHI. The other is safer street and mobility. This aims to improve the safety of roads. So World Resource Organization is the lead partner to provide this support. The other area is safe road users, basically through producing media campaigns. So Vital Strategy is the partner for this support, as well as police enforcement is supported by Global Road Safety Partnership. We do have also John Hopkins University, who supports in strengthening the data collection system. So we will be a key partner really to realize one of the goal in reducing traffic fatalities from 34 to 10, which is indicated in the implementation plan. So that's our role. Thank you.
Thank you. I move to Dr. Gamado.
Very good afternoon to you all, and I'm touched and appreciate the initiative taken by Minister of Transport, and particularly in putting the 10 years perspective plan in a very concrete but very ambitious target with wide spectrum in terms of the need to deliver on those. If you, I'm trying to come from that perspective of then Mr. Ban Ki-moon was re-emphasizing the need to closely work with our member countries. Ethiopia is one of the member countries of Global Green Growth Institute, and Global Green Growth Institute has been very influential and actively participating in policy development in Ethiopia. Many of you may not know, but I am sure most of you know the green, climate resilient green growth strategy, green economy strategy, or CRG for short. And this institute is one of the key supporting institutes for developing that strategy. So the Global Green Growth Institute has been actively participating in the policy formulation and implementation in Ethiopia. As one of our mandate is to give very neutral in all dimensions policy advice to our member countries and sectors. Our role in the and also the other one is on partnership. Our role in implementing the 10 years perspective would be to check if there is any need to develop new policy or strengthen the existing policy. The other responsibility, or in general, and the Minister of Transport in particular, is to strengthen partnership. By the way, it has been very eloquently mentioned by Mr. Zamadne and others before us that the private sector will come for investment for profit. Okay, so there must be a very clear working environment, policy environment, guarantee on many areas. Okay, so if you look into the 10 years perspective that the minister has put in place, there is a need for, the gap is huge, and there is a need to fill that gap in terms of capacity, in terms of technology, in terms of human power and financial resources. So to realize those targets, the Global Green Growth Institute would work toward this strengthening, promoting partnership between developed and the developing countries, which means mobilizing resources from the developed countries through the private sector and also other means, and ensuring that the projects to be developed to achieve those targets would be winning projects, or as we call it, bankable projects, and the GGI will closely and strongly support development of such projects, and finally giving technical support and actively participating in the implement as implementing partner for the donor community. Thank you.
I thank all the three panelists for their engagement on this first round of question. I can hear that they have said that from their perspective, they will support us in finance, in technical expertise, and bringing new knowledge, innovation. I also see that we can bring new modality of working, including the PPP modality. I also hear that there should be more collaboration with other developing countries. So thank you so much for this. I will go to the second part of the question, where we have seen the 10 years perspective plan entails mobilizing 74 billion USD. So what to mobilize this financing from the international organization, our development partners, to execute this ambitious plan? What are the best practices also that you can highlight? I would start with Dr. Daniel, Mr. Daniel.
Okay. So there is no, I think, silver bullet for this answer, because most of the time what financiers look into is, for example, the performance of the previous project, financed project, as well as project selection is really important because the project that we select, what will be its contribution, especially in facilitating trade and transport regionally as well as internationally, what will be the socio-economic benefit, as well as really towards achieving the international commitments such as sustainable development goals. So first we have to be very cautious in selecting the project, as well as other countries' experience recommend that I think the feasibility study has to be carried out by the government, whether that is government-owned and project or PPP projects. The feasibility study has to be carried out by the government in order to assess whether the project is feasible, what are the alternative solutions, what is the socio-economic benefits and outcome, its environment outcome. Besides that, if you decide really to use PPP as a model, we have to carry out this financial and economic analysis. Sometimes it's called business model, because in that case, we will see which model of the PPP that we should follow. As I have said before, it should be, for example, for road construction project, is it the build, own, operate, transfer, or sometimes build, operate, transfer? In that case, the government will provide the fund, but the private sector will build, operate, and at 25 years it will transfer. So we have to carry out the business model of the project really to assess how much it is cost, what is the charging basis, and what is the objective criteria in terms of the social, financial, economic benefits. So these are the recommendations from other international best practices. So once we select the project, as Mr. Zamadene earlier said, the next step is really for proactive engagement with donor agencies for looking for finance. That should be supported by a clear stakeholder engagement plan with different strategies. As Addis Ababa is a seat of many diplomat, we can use one-to-one meeting or such type of platform, but project-specific consultation session is really important. National financiers. So besides that, continuous and targeted communication or promotion is very important, especially for external investors. That should be supported by a clear strategic communication plan. We have to develop our messaging cautiously to communicate what is the potential profit, what is the contribution of government, or what are the incentives, if there is any available debt. So that type of information has to be clearly indicated in the communication content. So there are various communication channels through brochures. You can use advertisement, either print media or electronic media. You can use website or social medias, or our embassies can be also one source of communication channels. So first, we have to be cautiously select the projects, make the feasibility and economic and financial assessment. Then we have to communicate and engage with stakeholders, especially financial institutions, for funding. So, thank you.
Maybe Dr. Gamado, I would like you to respond to this question in light of the global commitment on climate change and how we can align that question to it.
Thank you very much for that reminder, Excellency Yasmin. The global community committed to support, including the private sector and the donor community. It has been mentioned in earlier that it's not matter of lack of financial resources, but the trust and the sustainability of system we put in place, and the functionality of the whole system that matters. So with the current leadership of the Minister of Transport and our government leadership and commitment to green economic development that aimed at advanced balance between economic growth and the sustainability of environment, and our leading role in the global climate action, including the Paris Agreement commitments and other opportunities, the ministry can still achieve what it has planned, provided that, one, relevant policy and regular mechanisms are put in place. For example, if we look into I'm only coming from the green transport, green economic development perspective. For example, mass transport that has been started by the ministry needs to be scaled up, not only in few cities or big cities, but also throughout the country. E-mobility needs to be promoted, and non-motor transport, as you can see there, bike, walking, all those needs to be mainstreamed. What does that mean? It has to be included in all policies and regulatory mechanisms, in not only in the transport ministry, but also in other sectors. To do that, do we have functional, active policy guidelines, regulations? We have to check on those. If we put on those, if we mainstream the e-mobility, mass bus, and the low carbon transportation system, which we call sustainable transport, and then practically demonstrate that to invest on initial catalyzing activities or projects that would call other investors to crowd in. It is possible and achievable to mobilize the indicated 4 billion USD. But as I said, we need to demonstrate that we are really interested in and willing to commit our, like, building basic infrastructure, allocating budget. I'm grateful to my government, although I'm not representing my government at this stage, that the government has been taking actions in ensuring the climate resilient green economy strategy. So if we continue putting resources and putting infrastructure in place and remain open and demonstrate that we are really committed for delivery, we can easily achieve the indicated target. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There's not much for me to add to my colleagues here. I just want to say that you got a beautiful plan. Now you need an execution plan. Execution, what to achieve by when, who going to do it, and what are resources going to enable the team to do it. And we're all familiar. Be it deliver food, deliver investment, deliver transport services, it's the same. I think I very much look forward to the next step is to have an execution or deliver plan. And along with that execution plan, I also want to highlight the importance of partnership. This is not something Ministry of Finance or Ministry of Transport are going to do it alone. We all know that no public resources will be able to finance this plan. But also the technical expertise. We don't have enough technical expertise. We don't have enough procurement people. We don't have enough safeguards management people currently or in the near future. So we need to mobilize and the partnership and to see what are the comparative advantages of different partners in this, so that we can make the partnership a productive and results oriented. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you all panelists. I think in terms of attracting investment and financial resources, I always say that resource is not an issue. The more we are efficient in our delivery, the more we attract more resources. I have seen this in my last 13 years experience managing development partners, where wherever there is more execution, delivery of results, they will bring more resources. So, and also understanding how the global, move is very critical now in terms of Green Deal, climate, smart investments. It's where we are heading. So the transport sector also in its 10 years per touch, which is one fundamental way how we can also tap more resources where they are. So with this saying that and taking the advice of our panelists, that means we have almost secured the resources. Now we move to execution. Execution is very important because that's where we lack the capacity as a country. Of course, compared to other countries also, our colleagues from World Bank and other partners rate us good. And that's why also we are able to more access, the bigger share from their support. Not only World Bank, but other partners as well. But still, to where we want to reach, we are far behind. So my third question would be in line with that. So in your opinion, what change should the Ministry of Transport and also Ethiopia as a country should do better in terms of utilizing resources from our development partners at large? I'll start with Xiaoping.
Thank you. I would say, start with people first. The good news about Ethiopia that you got a brilliant young population, which is only half as old as the people in my country, China. But when I started in development years ago, and we were in the same situation as Ethiopia, we was considered a low capacity, low base of everything. But you got to think about a skill development plan, and traditionally, all think about engineers are very important, and a lot of us are trained as engineers. And in today's world, engineers need to be supported by procurement, financial management, safeguards, legal, all this expertise all within the transport sector. And there's actually a shortage of these expertise. And many of our projects, as you know, are hampered by, for example, inadequate safeguards management. So this is not about one training session or one study tool. We need to think about start with universities, how we develop these curriculums, and to have a ladder of skills coming into the market. If we work with the existing pool, we're always human resource constrained. The second point I want to say is that we need to work on the institution framework. I think the leadership here under Her Excellency Minister is very strong, but we need to consolidate. For example, how many organizations are working on rural roads? How many organizations are working on logistics? Can we become institutionally more efficient and to have this one-stop, shop for solutions in improving the reliability and the efficiency of logistics? A container doesn't have to wait for more than a month to go from Addis to Djibouti. If we have this, a more efficient institution. It's not about money here. Again, consistency, consistent with what Her Excellency State Minister said. It's about management. It's about the institutional efficiency here. Last but not the least, I want to just touch upon what Her Excellency Jasmine just said don't think about the resources is constrained, limited. It's actually the pie is growing, because we're talking about not only the government budget, the donors budget, we're talking about the private sector, we talk about NGOs. And so the good